Hello and welcome to Sci-Fi Christian. I'm Ben DeBono, here talking to you some more about Paradise Lost. And I'm going to be honest with you guys right up front. I lied to you unintentionally. I said I was going to be splitting Book 9 into 2 parts. It's going to be 3 parts. What do you do? What do you do? I mean, it's such a dense book. It's an incredibly dense book, and I had no intention of doing this. I was hopeful I was going to get through the rest. Started putting my notes together and realized, you know what, it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. I apologize if it seems like I'm drawing this out. It's really not my intention to do so. In my defense, and the reasons for doing so are really just that, like I said last time, this book, Book 9 in Paradise Lost, is in and of itself a literary masterpiece. Paradise Lost as a whole, of course, is, but Book 9 in and of itself is a masterpiece. And I feel that we would be doing ourselves a severe disservice if we were to rush through it. So I don't want to do that. I just feel like this is such a dense portion of the text of Paradise Lost that so much happens here. This is the culmination of the entire story. That we can't rush through it. And on top of that, it's a very long book. I mean, it comes out at about 1,200 lines. And you look at, like, some books in Paradise Lost. I think Book 2 is right around 500. So this is over twice the length of something like Book 2. And various other books in Paradise Lost are both less dense, but also maybe not as short as Book 2, but quite a bit shorter than this. To put that in perspective, 1,200 lines is approximately half the length of Beowulf. Not quite. I think Beowulf is 2,600, 2,800, somewhere in there, but it's close. It is 1,200 lines, is again about half the length of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. So entire works are only a little bit longer than what we encounter in Book 9. So my anticipation would be, and we'll see, how reality plays it out, but that this is actually going to be the shortest of the 3 videos, and then next time I'm going to cover the remainder of what we don't get to this time. So this time we're going to cover Eve's temptation and her fall. Next time we'll cover Adam's temptation and his fall, as well as any concluding portions of the book, and then I might take a few minutes just to kind of wrap up and tie together these 3 parts of Book 9 at the end of the next video. Okay? So, let's not waste any more time. Let's dive right in. And I'm actually, oh, by the way, just for the sake of clarity, last time we covered lines 1 through 411. This time we are covering lines 412 through 833. So approximately the same size chunk as last time. But I actually do just want to briefly touch on something I meant to talk about last time and didn't. Right at the beginning, when Milton we had that kind of heraldic quality I was talking about a lot last time to open this book, and then we saw it at a few other places. And he says something very interesting during that section, where he says that what I have to talk about now is not less heroic than Milton, of course, than Homer, but more heroic than him. And so he kind of, in a very unique portion of the poem that has referenced Homer and Virgil so many times, now he is actually comparing himself to them. And it kind of throws you for a loop if you think about it, because I think that so much of this poem has been respectful toward Homer and Virgil, and has been about paying them homage. And then he kind of turns that around here and almost seems to be placing himself above them, which is a very curious thing to do, because you simply don't do that in literature. You don't place yourself above Homer. Homer is the beginning in many ways of Western culture, Western civilization, of Western literature. Every author within the Western literary tradition owes Homer a debt, and Milton is certainly aware of that throughout the text of Paradise Lost. So what I think is actually going on there, though, is not Milton saying, I'm better than Homer. I think that if you read carefully those lines, what he's actually saying is that his subject matter is of greater importance than Homer's. And that's very true, of course, especially if you're reading this poem as Milton is writing it and as he intends us to read it as coming from a Christian perspective, where Homer, and Lewis makes this distinction very well in his preface to Paradise Lost. Homer is writing from a first stage epic where we are introduced to the epic style and epic type of storytelling, but the subject matter is actually of relatively minor importance. Even within Homer, we have the Trojan War going on, the fall of Troy, which would be of great importance, but the book in the Iliad is not about the fall of Troy, it's about the rage of Achilles. And then Lewis makes the point that Virgil brings the epic into what we would now think of as epic subject matter, the founding of Rome, which is of much greater importance than Achilles being pissed off and sitting in his ships for a few days, and that's nothing to say against the Iliad, of course. It's a simple fact that that's the transition, and Lewis points it out really, really well. If you want to go read more of that, his preface to Paradise Lost, again, is where you can find that. And so I think what Virgil is doing is picking up on some of that, but then or did I say Virgil? Gosh, I'm not doing well with my names tonight, gentlemen, or ladies, whoever's watching this. I apologize. Too much beer before recording, I guess. No, there's no such thing as too much beer. Who am I kidding? Anyway, Milton is picking up on that. And what he is doing is not so much trying to say I'm better than Homer as saying that there is this kind of progression of subject matter, and that where Virgil progresses beyond Homer to talk about something of great importance, the founding of Rome, Milton is in the same way progressing his subject matter beyond Virgil and talking about events of apocalyptic importance, which I use apocalyptic in a technical sense there to mean events of earth-shattering, world-changing importance, something that quite literally happens, as we'll see in the section we're going to read tonight. And not in its colloquial manner to mean the end of the world. Okay, so enough about that. Let's get into the actual text for tonight. And I'm so glad that we didn't rush through this last time, because where we pick up the text, you'll remember we had Satan's soliloquy, Adam and Eve's dialogue, and then Eve is on her own, Satan's on the prowl. That's where we open. And we have what I think, and I don't want to commit to this too much because it's a strong statement, but what I think might be my favorite moment in Paradise Lost. Certainly a moment that when I was reading this last week in preparation for doing this video, I just had to put the book down and really think about what Milton was getting at here. And because we have this moment where Satan is almost converted by Eve. The events almost take the opposite course of what actually happens. Satan looks at Eve, sees Eve in her unfallen glory, and is almost converted by her. So I want to pick up an excerpt from this, starting in line 455, going to line 472, and then we'll talk about it. So Satan says, or this isn't Satan, this is Milton, that's the narrator speaking. He says, "Pleasure took the serpent to behold the flowery plat, the sweet recess of Eve, thus early, thus alone, her heavenly form angelic, but more soft and feminine, her graceful innocence, her every air of gesture or least action, overawed his malice." Pause. Overawed his malice, and with repine sweet bereaved his fierceness of the fierce intent it brought, that space the evil one abstracted from his own evil, and for the time remained stupidly good, of enmity disarmed, of guile, of hate, of envy, of revenge. I'll read the rest of the excerpt in a minute, because of course this turns around. But man, what a powerful moment in this poem. You have to just be in awe of what Milton has done there with both the psychology of Satan and the grandeur of pre-fallen Eve. And whatever else you think about Milton's portrayal of Eve in the poem, that moment, at least in my opinion, goes a long way toward redeeming any claims we moderners would have against Milton's rather pre-modern perspective of women. Just think about that. It's another one of those moments in this poem that Milton is presenting to us, but it goes fundamentally beyond what human reason can grasp. Imagine the most beautiful woman you've ever seen, not in a lustful way, but in a way where you were simply overawed by feminine beauty. And amplify that by about 10 trillion. The Milton there, for a moment, he is contemplating through the eyes of Satan what pre-fallen femininity must have been like. I mean, holy crap. That, just think about what that's like. And he can't express it because we're not able to comprehend it, but what he tells us is that pre-fallen femininity in the mother of all humankind, Eve, is great enough to make the evil one abstracted from his own evil, to stand stupidly good, to be disarmed of enmity, of guile, of hate, of envy, of revenge. Just stop and think of the power of what Milton is saying there. It is absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. But of course, that's not where the excerpt ends. So, picking up again in line 466, I believe. But the hot hell that always in him burns, though in mid-heaven, soon ended his delight, and tortures him now more, the more he sees of pleasure not for him ordained. Then soon fierce hate he recollects, and all his thoughts of mischief gradulating thus excites. It's such a tragic moment that happens there in that second part of what I just read. Because here is Satan face to face with the height of God's creation in heaven or on earth. And I think within biblical theology that's true of the way that Eve is presented, but it's certainly true within Milton that Eve is the height of what God has accomplished. And for a moment it almost turns him around, but yet even that near redemption becomes a source of damnation for him. As for a second, this goodness, and I think we have to say goodness, flares up within Satan, only to pull him deeper in. It's such a stunning moment of perfect writing, of poetic beauty. These are the moments why we read literature, right? These are the moments we stick around for, stuff like that. But then this moment kind of goes on during Satan's first address of Eve, because he uses what he's just observed, that she's the height of God's creation, to appeal to her pride, which, as we will see, is going to be his source of getting her to fall ultimately. So as he addresses her, he says in line 538, he calls her fairest resemblance of thy maker fair. And so he takes what he's observed and then he says it to her. And he says it to her in a way that twists it to pull her toward her damnation. And this is just the perfect cap on what Milton has done here in these last several lines, because he's taken the moment of near redemption for Satan. The closest that Satan has actually got to redemption in this poem, I believe. And turns it very quickly, very subtly, into the first movement of Eve's damnation. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Okay. So then Satan gets Eve to take a walk with him over to the tree. And we are going to now see Eve's fall in 6 distinct stages. Okay? It's not my claim that that's the only way you could analyze this scene, of course. Once again, I'm coming at this poem as an amateur. But it is, I think, a helpful way of looking at it. So stage 1 is their initial dialogue at the tree. So, the serpent, Satan, is like, hey, come take a look at this. And he's like, okay, never mind the danger I was supposed to be looking out for. Let's go. And they get there. It's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then beginning in line 646, Eve says, stop. We shouldn't do this. So she says, serpent, we might have spared our coming hither, fruitless to me, though fruit be here to excess, the credit of whose virtue rests with thee. Wondrous indeed if cause of such effects. So the serpent earlier than this had said, hey, I ate from this tree, it made me able to talk, come check it out. So, wondrous indeed of cause of such effects, that's what she's talking about, referring to there. But of this tree we may not taste nor touch, God so commanded, and left the command, sole daughter of his voice. The rest we live law to ourselves, our reason is our law. To whom the tempter guilefully replied, indeed, hath God then said that of the fruit of all these garden trees you shall not eat, yet lords declared of all the earth and air? To whom thus Eve, yet sinless, of the fruit of each tree in the garden we may eat. But of the fruit of this fair tree amidst the garden God hath said, you shall not eat thereof, nor shall ye touch it, lest ye die. So, we have our opening salvos in what's going to be a very interesting back and forth. Note that once again, the interdiction against eating from the tree is repeated. I know I've pointed this out over and over and over again during the videos leading up to this moment, but that's because I think Milton points it out over and over and over again. He repeats this interdiction right up to the moment where Eve is going to eat. So, Eve says, they show up, and, oops, you took me to the tree of knowledge of good and evil, I can't do this. And, they have this back and forth. She repeats the interdiction. Ignorance is off the table at this point completely. Again, we talked about that a lot last time, but again, Milton stresses that even one step further. It's not like she got led to a tree and didn't realize where it was. She knows where she is. She knows what the consequences are. She knows what is not allowed here, and she does not walk away. Remember how we talked about last time that after Eve leaves Adam, the fall becomes inevitable? Here we take another step toward it. Second stage is Satan's reply to her then, which is full of pride and deception. Note that he calls her the queen of the universe when he refers to her. Okay, so now we've taken a step forward in his titles for her. Before he calls her the fairest of God's creation, and now he takes that up a notch and says queen of the universe, but she is not the queen of the universe, because that would put her on a level with God. She and Adam are God's stewards of the universe, but they are not the king and queen of the universe. It's a very important distinction, and one that Satan has subtly now led her into deception, and he leads her through her pride. Which, note, that is the same way that he fell. We're going to stress those parallels throughout this section, okay? Because they're very, very strong, the parallels between Satan's own fall and Eve's fall here. She's not the queen of the universe, but she accepts from him that title. She does not interrupt. She never contradicts. And then he further goes and claims that the fruit can't bring death because He's eaten it, and he's still there, or so he claims. Of course, we know that he hasn't actually eaten it. He claims that but this is where he then twists God's meaning about what death means, which is a deception. And I'm going to read an excerpt here where he does this. But before I do, we dive into that as Satan twists the meaning of the penalty for eating from the tree. I think it's important to note that the reason why that deception is going to be successful is because Eve has already, in some sense, accepted her own fall. She's accepted that she is going to fall. Okay, so lines 703 to 715. And for this excerpt, it is important to note that Eve simply thinks she's speaking to a talking serpent. She is completely unaware that this is Satan. Okay? Or at least either she's completely unaware or has chosen to be willfully ignorant. Because, of course, she and Adam have been warned by Raphael that Satan is out there. Make of that what you will. I guess I lean a bit more towards the latter. I think she's being willfully ignorant here, but it is ambiguous in the text which way she's going. So, interpret that how you will. So, Satan then says to her, and starting in line 703, "Why then was this forbid? Why but to awe? Why but to keep ye low and ignorant his worshippers? He knows that in the day ye eat thereof, your eyes that seem so clear yet are but dim shall perfectly be then opened and cleared. And ye shall be as gods, knowing both good and evil as they know. That ye should be as gods, since I as man, internal man, is but proportioned meat, I of brute, ye of human gods." Wait, I misread that, I apologize. "I of brute human, ye of human gods." In other words, I ate from the tree, I became human, and I was an animal before. You start as a human, you eat from the tree, you're going to become gods. "So ye shall die, perhaps, by putting off human to put on gods, death to be wished, though threatened, which no worse than this can bring." So what he's saying then is, you're going to die, but you're going to die as you'll die in the sense that you'll no longer be human, and you'll be a god instead. So it's a very deliberate and subtle twisting of God's words. I do think it's important, though, again, to note that Eve would not be taken in by this deception if she didn't want to be. This is willful ignorance. And that leads us to stage 3, which is Eve's contemplation. She doesn't respond to him. And this is very important, that what Eve does next is not to respond, but to contemplate the fruit. To contemplate, then, what the tree of the knowledge of good and evil holds. So starting in line 735, "Fixed on the fruit she gazed, which to behold might tempt alone." In other words, what Milton's trying to say to her, say to us there, is that the very act of sitting there contemplating the fruit becomes an act of temptation. And this is very important because now we've taken that step where Satan is no longer the tempter, Eve is the tempter. She is proceeding with her own temptation. Satan has done what Satan needs to do. The ball has been handed off, and Eve is running forward with her own act of temptation. Again, as we talked about a lot last time, the singular moment of the fall has not happened, but we are in the midst of the fall in the broader sense. Okay. "Fruit she gazed, which to behold might tempt alone, and in her ears the sound yet rung of his persuasive words, impregned with reason to her seeming, and with truth. Meanwhile the hour of noon drew on, and waked an eager appetite, raised by the smell so savory of that fruit, which with desire inclinable, now grown to touch of taste, solicited her longing eye. Yet first, pausing awhile, thus to herself she mused. Great are thy virtues, doubtless best of fruits." And stop there for a second. So now she takes a step even further. She's not just looking at it, she's now engaging with it. And we have to look past the fact that she's speaking to a fruit here. It's not meant to be comical. We're meant to see the progression that now she is actually not just holding it at a distance, but it comes closer, becomes a partner of conversation with her. Okay? Great are thy virtues, doubtless, best of fruits, though kept from man, and worthy to be admired, whose taste too long forborne at first to say gave elocution to the mute, and taught the tongue not made for speech to speak thy praise, referring to the serpent there. Conceals not from us, naming thee the tree of knowledge, knowledge both of good and evil. Forbids us then to taste, but his forbidding commends thee more. Game over, it's done. If there was any chance before this, and I don't think there was for quite a while now, that she could turn around, it's done. Forbidding us then to taste, but his forbidding commends thee more, while it infers the good by thee communicated, and our want. For good unknown sure is not had, or had, and yet unknown is as not had at all. In plain then, what forbids he but to know? Forbids us good, forbids us to be wise. Note that God has become the enemy in Eve's mind, and we're going to see that stated much more explicitly after she eats from the fruit, but leading up to that singular moment, it has already happened. God is the enemy for Eve right now. Such prohibitions bind not, but if death bind us with afterbands, what profits then our inward freedom? In the day we eat of this fair fruit, our doom is we shall die. How dies the serpent? He hath eaten and lives, and knows and speaks and reasons and discerns irrational till then. For us alone was death invented, or to us denied the intellectual fruit for beasts reserved? For beasts it seems, yet that one beast which first hath tasted envies not, but brings with joy the good befallen him. Author unsuspect, friendly to man, far from deceit or guile, what fear I then? Rather, what know to fear under this ignorance of good and evil, of God or death, of law or penalty? Here grows the cure of all. Just think about that for a second. A couple more lines I want to read, but just the cure of all. So now the fruit has just gone from, it's gone from the forbidden fruit to, hey, that seems like it would be okay, to this is beneficial, to the cure of everything. This fruit divine, fair to the eye, inviting to the taste, of virtue to make wise, what hinders then to reach and feed at once both mind and body? And then, of course, stage 4 is just a formality at this point. Eve eats the apple. Just 2 lines here, 780 and 81. So saying, her rash hand in evil hour forth reaching to the fruit she plucked, she eat. And there's your moment. I love what Milton does there. A poet of lesser powers would draw that out. Would maybe talk about the taste, the smell, the apple, as she chews it and swallows and try and draw us into the motion of eating. But Milton wisely sees that's not the point. The point isn't that she eats the apple. The point is the sin. It's not the fruit itself. It's the fact that it's everything that's led up to it. It's the singular moment is all that's required. We have now worked our way up to that, and now we need to work our way down, right? It's the process that surrounds both sides of that moment that truly matter. And allowing it to just hang there as that simple, singular moment is powerful beyond words. She plucked, she eat. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. And then immediately following that, in the next three lines, Earth felt the wound, and nature from her seat signed through all her works, gave signs of woe, that all was lost. And you get chills just reading that. Man, and again, apocalyptic moment right there. Literally earth shattering. Earth felt the wound. Nature, signed through all her works, gave signs of woe, that all was lost. Milton, who can draw us into such incredible detail, these long soliloquies, here in these few lines, 80 through 84 with Eve eating the apple, and then that earth felt the wound moment. He then cuts to the power of brevity there. It's an astonishing work of poetry. Absolutely incredible. Next, Eve chooses to rejoice in her fall. It's very shocking the way that Milton describes this, because her immediate reaction as now fallen humanity is not, oh crap, what did I do? No, Milton tells us as she launches into the soliloquy, she pleasingly began, and then she goes on and talks about the virtues of this fruit. And at one point, then she refers to God as our great forbidder. And that's where I said that she now, after eating the fruit, God becomes explicitly the enemy to Eve. Before, he is implicitly referred to as the enemy, but now he is the great forbidder. And then the final stage, Eve decides to bring down Adam. So lines 8:16 to 8:33, and this is where we'll wrap up for tonight. But to Adam, in what sort shall I appear? This is Eve speaking in her soliloquy after eating from the fruit. The soliloquy where she pleasingly began. But to Adam, in what sort shall I appear? Shall I to him make known as yet my change, and give him to partake full happiness with me? Or rather not, but keep the odds of knowledge in my power without co-partner. Oh my goodness. I mean, it's like, what am I going to do? Bring him down to my level, or should I enjoy this all by myself? So to add what wants in female sex, the more to draw his love, and render me more equal, and perhaps a thing not undesirable, sometimes superior, for inferior who is free. And if you want, right there, the moment of sin in all of Paradise Lost, it is that lie that to be inferior is to be bound, to be a slave. The overturning of God's hierarchy is the result of sin in Paradise Lost. Period. That's why we saw last time in the first part of Book 9 that when Eve leaves Adam, she leaves behind the hierarchy that God has put in place. At that moment, the fall has become inevitable. And so here we see that now she's decided in her fallen state that to be inferior, to be a part of that hierarchy where God has placed her, is to be a slave. This may be well, but what if God have seen and death ensue? Then I shall be no more, and Adam wedded to another Eve shall live with her enjoying, I extinct. A death to think confirm, then I resolve, Adam shall share with me in bliss or woe. So dear I love him, that with all deaths I could endure, without him live no life. And you'll note again the parallel to Satan here. Satan wants to be like God. Eve wants to be like God. Their pride, their desire to be the king or queen of the universe is their first step towards their undoing. And then the fall complete, it's not enough to be fallen. I have to take someone else down with me. Satan chooses to target humanity. Eve chooses to target Adam. Satan was successful, and as we know, so will Eve. She will be successful. But we will read more about that next time in the third and I promise final part of Book 9. Again, I apologize if it seems like I am dragging this out. For my part, for myself, I would not be satisfied with having to rush through this the way we would have had to get this all into 2 or even 1 parts. This is, to me, much more satisfying to go through it this way. If you don't feel the same, I do apologize. I want this to be enjoyable experience, not only for myself, but for my viewers. And so next time we will definitely wrap up book 9, and then I'm sure we're all eager, I know I am, to get going on book 10 and move towards the home stretch of Paradise Lost. So that's it for tonight. I am Andy Bono, and the Sci-Fi Christian. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.